We are ready to continue our study on the Christian and social media. We're calling social media a dangerous playground. And tonight we're shifting gears a little bit. We've been talking a lot about focus, solitude, boundaries, the way we use our time. Now we're shifting into the relational aspects of social media. And tonight we're going to think about the subject selfies. Now you know what a selfie is, right? Maybe you've heard this, the myth of Narcissus. Narcissus was a young man who was very handsome, and he was quite the object of affection for a lot of young ladies in his hometown. But he wasn't interested in any of them because their beauty all paled by comparison to his own image. So he did nothing night and day but just stare at his own reflection in the water until he pined away and died. And it's hard not to make a connection between that myth and the way that many of us pine away staring at the phone-shaped pools in our hands all the time, never looking up and always just focusing on that, especially in terms of the selfie. Now, I've got more stats on selfies here than you would ever want to hear, 15 pages worth. Found this online. I'm updating my material, and this was dated December the 30th, 2024. But I do want to tell you a little bit about where we are as a country in selfies. 5.3 billion selfies are taken daily. That's 4% of all the photos that are taken. And individuals spend 54 hours a year, or 7 minutes a day, taking selfies. Here's a huge surprise. Women take 1.5 times more selfies than men. Now, I'm not picking on you women. Y'all are better looking than we are. So we don't want to take selfies of ourselves. In 2010, the iPhone 4 was the first smartphone to have a selfie camera, so that's how long this phenomenon's been going on. About 14 years. And we even have a National Selfie Day now. Did you know June the 21st has been declared National Selfie Day? So make sure that you take a selfie of yourself and post it all over the internet on June the 21st of this year. We'll have that in the update, I'm sure. Crystal will put that in there. Make sure everybody's ready for it. Charge your phone the night before. Make sure you get it ready. What I found most interesting in these stats and facts are how dangerous selfies are. There are a number of selfie-related deaths. And a lot of this is due to what is known as FOMO. Have you ever heard that phrase, FOMO? It stands for fear of missing out. And it's the main driver of exposing oneself to danger while taking selfies. People look for new ways to stand out on social media by taking risks to create exciting selfies. They want to stand out. So they might stand on a precipice of a building that they probably shouldn't be on, or they might do something that they wouldn't otherwise do. They take bigger risks, and this yields a number of deaths every year. 43 people die taking selfies every year, according to these stats. And more people die taking selfies than by shark attacks. Now, people worry about shark attacks, but a selfie is more dangerous than a shark, statistically speaking. Primary cause of death while taking selfies, drowning. And I'll let you try to figure that out. But drowning is the number one cause of death by selfie. Next to that is transportation, which I would expect, distracted driving. I think another stat we shared earlier in the quarter is over 3,500 deaths occur on the road every year from distracted driving. A lot of that's texting and using social media while you're supposed to be looking at the road. The next on the list is falling, then fire, then electrocution, a firearm, animal. Maybe got too close to the tiger cage at the zoo. And then, of course, there's an other category. So if you didn't learn anything tonight, at least you learned that selfies are dangerous. Didn't know that, but they're dangerous in more subtle ways. And we want to talk about that tonight. Now, the point of this lesson is not to say, don't ever take a selfie. If you're at a historic place or a beautiful place, or you're with some beautiful friends, and you want to mark the occasion by taking a picture of yourself in that environment or with friends, by all means do it. But the dangers that I'm warning about are self-obsession, self-absorption, selfishness, not looking at other people and seeing their needs and loving other people and being interested in other people. That's the danger that we're talking about, not the picture itself. And I hope everybody understands where we're coming from on this. Think about this selfie culture we live in compared to what the Lord asked of us. We'll start with Matthew 16:24. If anyone would come after me, let him deny himself, take up his cross, and follow me. Self-denial, first step in following Jesus. Take yourself off the throne of your heart and put Jesus there. And take up his cross. Have you ever thought about what that means? People say, well, it's suffering. It is suffering, but it's special suffering. Suffering that comes to you because you're a Christian. The wicked have many sorrows, Psalm 32 verse 10 says, but only Christians bear a cross. So this is far different from the selfie culture that promotes oneself and pumps oneself up and wants all the world to take notice. Jesus says, I want you to put me first place in your heart. And then you have Paul's statement in Romans 12. I appeal to you, therefore, brothers, by the mercies of God, to present your bodies as a living sacrifice, holy and acceptable to God, which is your spiritual worship. Do not be conformed to this world, but be transformed by the renewal of your mind, that by testing you may discern what is the will of God, what is good and acceptable and perfect. If you put those two verses together, he's asking for body and mind, all that you are. He wants it all. Living sacrifices, of course, makes you think back to the Old Testament animal sacrifices. And we all know Paul's not speaking literally here of ritualistic suicide or something awful like that. What he's saying is your living sacrifice is what you do with your body in the day. You don't have it for yourself. Your body is for God. And your actions are for God. Your mind is renewed daily through the Word. And you live for Him, not yourself. There's a lot of warnings about this selfish culture, and I think there are like 18 sins in this list in 2 Timothy 3, and at least 7 of them, if I counted correctly, if I remember my count, I put them in the orange lettering, or is that yellow lettering, are related to loving self. People, Paul predicts, will be lovers of self, lovers of money, proud, arrogant, abusive, disobedient to their parents, ungrateful, that's a form of selfishness, unholy, heartless, unappeasable, slanderous, without self-control, brutal, not loving good, treacherous, reckless, swollen with conceit, lovers of pleasure rather than lovers of God, having the appearance of godliness but denying its power. Paul says, avoid these kinds of people. Now, how do you describe someone who's constantly promoting themselves online? The pictures they like most are pictures of themselves, who build personas of themselves that aren't true representations. How do you describe them if you don't use words like lovers of self and swollen with conceit? And Paul says you need to avoid such people. Note that before he says avoid them, he warns them that these folks will have the appearance of godliness, but deny its power. And what that means is there are arguments in favor of self-obsession. There are arguments that people make in favor of selfishness. And they can make themselves seem justified in that behavior. Let's think about some of the arguments that they might make and talk about 3 arguments defending selfies, okay? And again, this is not absolute ban on selfies, but the kind of attitude behind the selfie that could be very dangerous. A selfish, ungrateful, self-absorbed attitude. Someone might say, well, I'm just being true to myself. I want to put myself out there. I'm not ashamed of who I am. And social media is a good place to promote that. And so I don't have to live a certain way or follow certain rules. I'm being true to myself. And this is a mantra that we hear all the time. And it's been very effective in making an impression on our young people. Years ago, Ellen DeGeneres was confronted about her LGBT status and her agenda and how she used her show back when she had it to promote that lifestyle. And she put this out on Twitter, I think, and it went viral. It was celebrated, and people shared it and liked it. She said, the only way I'm trying to influence people is to be more kind and compassionate with one another. I don't have an agenda. Attention, youth of the world. I want you to live your lives being exactly who you are. Be true to yourself. Is that a Christian message? Be exactly who you are. Be true to yourself. Well, the first problem is we don't know who we are. Not just on our own. The heart is deceitful, Jeremiah says. The wise man says, there's a way that seems right to a man, but the end thereof are the ways of death, Proverbs 14:12. It's not in a man who walks to direct his steps, Jeremiah 10:23. We are very confused about who we are. You read a lot these days about identity crisis. And kids are trying to figure out what gender they are. You know, we're that confused. We need guidance on who we are and our issues of identity. So that's the first problem is you got to figure out who you are in order to be yourself. The other problem is God doesn't want you to be yourself. He wants Christ to live in you. And that's really the truth of the gospel. For instance, in Galatians 2, verse 20, Paul said, I've been crucified with Christ. That means his ambitions, his agenda, his way of doing things, it's been put on the cross. It has died. It's been put aside. It is no longer I who live. See how different that is from be true to yourself? But Christ who lives in me. And the life I now live in the flesh, I live by faith in the Son of God who loved me and gave himself for me. Now he's choosing this life because it's far better than being true to himself. It takes a lot of faith to go there. But if you believe the promises of God, you leave your old self behind, the sinful ways, your agenda, your ways, your pride, your conceit, and you replace that with Christ, and your life is going to flourish, and then you're going to find out who you truly are. Because you are made to be hidden in Christ and for him to be hidden in you. So I'm being true to myself. That might be one argument. A second argument in defense of selfies is I'm just telling the truth. Now, I'm not just talking about pictures here, but I'm talking about promoting oneself online. And there's a lot of that going on where people like to get into arguments. They lose empathy for other people. And, they'll say, hey, if you can't take the truth, don't get online. I'm just telling it like it is. There's a problem with that. Proverbs 11:13 says, whoever goes about slandering reveals secrets, but he who is trustworthy in spirit keeps a thing covered. With this selfie culture, there's the promotion of oneself, and then there's the demotion of other people. when you live your life in comparisons, which there's a lot of that going on online, you have to not only pump yourself up, but you have to bring other people down. Because you got to look better than the other person. In 2 Corinthians 10:12, Paul says, those who compare themselves with themselves are not wise. That's a losing battle because there's always somebody who's going to look better than you. But if you're out there online or in real life slandering people, you're not trustworthy in spirit. If you love people, you're going to keep their faults to yourself unless it's absolutely necessary to share things. I'm getting into the issue of gossip now, and I want to talk to you about a few things to consider before you share information about others online or in real life. It doesn't matter. There's some questions that you should ask before you engage in that kind of behavior. Number one, ask yourself, is it true? You know, hearsay often gets mistaken for truth, especially when it's something we want to hear. If we're one of these competitive people and we involved in a rivalry and we hear something about the other person that makes them look bad, we want that to be true so badly that we're ready to share it right away. Yeah, that matches with what I always thought about that person. But do you really know it's true? Is your source hearsay, or did you get it from a good source? That's the first question you should ask. You should never be spreading falsehood and lies. Number two, is it necessary? Maybe it's true, but maybe it just doesn't need to be said. I mean, not every fault has to be shared. People make mistakes, and they pick themselves up, and they repent, and they go on their way. There's no reason for you to be involved in it. Is it necessary that this comes out? Is somebody in danger? Is there some reason to share it that would be more than you just trying to boost your own ego? And then, is it kind? Even confrontation can be kind. We're to restore those who've been overtaken in a fault in a spirit of gentleness, Galatians 6:1 says. When we defend our faith, we're to do it with gentleness and meekness and humility, 1 Peter chapter 3, verse 15. Can you share this in a kind way? And then finally, am I the one to tell it? Is it none of my business? Maybe it's true and maybe it needs to be told, but maybe you don't have the kind of relationship with that person to be sharing their stuff. All of this goes to the idea of promoting yourself online and trying to make other people look bad. We just got out of I think everybody would agree, a pretty nasty political season. And there's a lot of stuff that goes online that's just nasty, and a lot of it's not true. And just think how good the world would be in a political season like we just came out of if everybody followed these questions before they said anything or shared anything about their opponents. It'd be a totally different world, wouldn't it? It'd be a better world to live in. But think about those 4 questions. They're very important, and they'll keep you from slander and gossip. Another defense or justification for being self-absorbed online. If I don't promote myself, no one will. Well, why do you need to be promoted? Why do you need to have all those followers? Why do you need to have all those likes and accolades? Is that really what life is all about? When you turn to the Bible, you see that Christianity is a one another religion. Everybody's looking after the other person, and that's the beauty of it in the church. Paul says this in Philippians 2, 3, and 4, "Do nothing from selfish ambition or conceit, but in humility count others more significant than yourselves. Let each of you look not only to his own interests, but also to the interests of others." And after that advice, he gives us the example of Jesus. He says, "Have this mind in you, which was also in Christ Jesus." And he emptied himself, came down in the form of a servant, died in humility on a cross for us. That's our model, that's our goal, that's who we want to be like. And it's not a path of self-promotion. But you'll notice the whole world knows who Jesus is, yet he came humble and serving others. Another passage to look at. If anyone has this world's goods and sees his brother in need, yet closes his heart against him, how does God's love abide in him? 1 John 3:17. It's about the other person. It's not about you. How about this test John gives us in 1 John 4:20? If anyone says, I love God, and hates his brother, he is a liar. I love how John he's very blunt. He's a liar. He who does not love his brother whom he has seen cannot love God whom he has not seen. You understand the logic in that, right? God is not right there in front of us. In some senses, he's easier to love because we can't see him, and we can imagine things that may or may not be true about him. But your brother who's right there in front of you, there's an opportunity to love. There are things you can do directly with him. If you can't love in that way, in a direct, immediate way, how can you say you love God who is invisible and higher than you and more mysterious to you than your brother in Christ? John's not buying it. He's saying, I see people who love and people who don't love. And it's apparent in the way they treat one another. Loving somebody is not being puffed up with conceit and pride, promoting yourself all the time, standing on the street corner saying, look at me. Loving people is looking after the interests of others. So there's no defense for being a lover of self, being obsessed with yourself constantly. That's not the way we should live. So what do? Here's some advice on correcting our selfies. And I'm looking at these charts now thinking I should have changed the language because it sounds like I'm against taking the picture. Everybody follow me on what I'm talking about here? I'm talking about an attitude. An attitude. You know, selfies, a lot of times you run them through a filter. And that's not the kind of correcting that we're talking about here. We're talking about living a life, having a strong sense of self-worth, but doing it without pride and conceit. So number one, don't be insecure. Get your sense of self-worth from God, not from others' praise or your achievements. There are two systems of self-worth that you can choose from, two basic systems, and they can be explained in an equation. The first system is your self-worth equals achievements plus others' opinions. Now that's how most of the world operates. As long as I'm successful and not failing, not making any mistakes, and everybody's patting me on the back, I'm a good person. I have self-worth. I have self-esteem. How long does that hold up? Does that have a lasting quality? It doesn't, right? Because you're going to make mistakes. If you're trying to do something, you're going to fail eventually. And even if you're doing well, there are going to be people who stab you in the back or say things about you that aren't true or mistreat you or wrong you or just unintentionally hurt you. And your self-esteem is just going to come crashing down. The second system of self-worth is God's system, and it just says this. Your self-worth equals what God says about you. What God declares about you, you believe that about yourself, and you build your self-worth on that. And God's promises and His declarations don't change. There are three big ones that you need to think about when you're forming your identity and your self-worth. The first one is, you've been made in the image of God. That applies to every human being on earth. You've been made in the image of God. Genesis chapter 1, verses 26 and 27. No exceptions. The murderer on death row has been made in the image of God. The little baby that was born in a faraway place we've never heard of before has been made in the image of God. The rich, the poor, they've all been made in His image. That in and of itself makes you special. That's why we ought to have respect for human life. The second declaration that is also true of every human being, no matter where they live or when they lived, is that all have sinned and fall short of the glory of God. That's Romans chapter 3, verse 23. There's none righteous, not one, Romans 3:10. So that's not building self-esteem, really. That's kind of a setback for us, that we're unrighteous, we have sinned, we've missed the mark, we've failed, but we're in the same camp with everybody else. There's no comparisons to be made. He's better than him, or she's more righteous than he is, because all have sinned. None of us deserves heaven. We all deserve condemnation. The wages of sin is death. But here's the third declaration, and that is Jesus died so that you could be saved. Now think about what that means in terms of value. You've heard it, a lot of you have heard this your whole life. Just stop and think that the Son of God came to earth, gave up His glory in heaven to come as a human being and live at a time that was very hard to live in a part of the world that was very hard to live in. And after about 30 years on this earth, He allowed Himself to be nailed to a cross, and He died for you. Yes, He died for all mankind, but as we saw in Galatians 2:20, you can make it personally. You can make it personal. Paul said, He loved me and He gave Himself for me. And you can say that too. And that is the price tag on your soul. I heard one time that insurance companies tally up the value of a human life, and it kind of cheapens human beings to think you can put a price tag on it. But the Bible puts a price tag on your life. You're worth the blood of the Son of God. And so there's no reason to feel insecure about things. I love this quote from Thomas Jefferson: "A candle loses nothing when it lights another candle." We're lights. A lot of people have a scarcity mindset when it comes to relationships. If that person's over there having fun and making friends, that's less friends for me. If that person has more followers, that's less for me. No, there's enough to go around. In terms of love and relationships in this world, you'll never burn out. We're lights in the world. Let's act like it. Don't be insecure. Don't be jealous. Who can stand before envy? The proverb says. Number 2, don't make an idol of yourself. You know what idolatry got the Israelites? Misery and captivity. An idol is just anything that you put before God. And if you're promoting yourself before God, if the most important person in your life is you've just made an idol out of yourself. And you're going to suffer the same problems that Israel suffered when they made the golden calf or bowed down to Baal. The self is the new Baal. And that's a bad thing. Another quote I love, there was a journal where the Southern writer Flannery O'Connor recorded some of her prayers. And this one was found in her journal. "I do not know you, God, because I am in the way. I do not know you, God, because I am in the way." She recognized that her inflated self was eclipsing the Son in her life, God, her Father in heaven. And so we might have the same problem. We can't see what God is doing in our lives. We can't see all the blessings He's showered upon us because we're in the way. Get yourself out of the way. Don't make yourself an idol. Number 3, beware of pride. The Bible's very clear about what pride will do. Here's a quick list. Daniel 5:20, it hardens the mind. You know, in Daniel 5, you have Nebuchadnezzar's successor, Belshazzar. He's the guy that saw the writing on the wall. Well, he had a hard heart and because of his pride, and it was his downfall. It produces spiritual decay. Hosea lived in a time where the people had just fallen to corruption. They were so proud, prosperous, they took everything for granted, they were ungrateful. It keeps real progress from happening. Look at Proverbs 26, verse 12. Do you see a man who is wise in his own eyes? There's more hope for a fool than for him. And if you know Proverbs well, you know that fools are the bottom of the ladder. They're low down. So he says a guy that's wise in his own eyes, he has less hope than a fool. And hope has to do with progress, forward motion. You can't do that with pride. It keeps us from coming to God. The fool has said in his heart, there is no God. And it leads us to destruction. Everybody knows Proverbs 16:18. Pride goes before destruction, and a haughty spirit before a great fall. So don't give in to pride. It's a temptation, but it doesn't pay. And then develop empathy. People have made a distinction between sympathy and empathy, and I guess there is a difference. Sympathy is being able to feel with a person. Empathy is to know what that person's going through by experience. All this means is, and we've said this almost every week in this class, don't forget that there's another person on the other side of that screen. You're engaging human beings. And this is why the Bible is so helpful in this, even though the technology came long after the Bible was completed. It's all about human interaction and the devotion we give to God. And there have been some horrible stories that have come out since social media has come on the rise about cyberbullying and kids taking their own lives and the mental health crisis we have in this country, and how screen time tracks with low self-esteem. We know what it's doing to our mental health. And for some reason, we aren't studying it enough and trying to figure out how to fix it. But a little empathy will go a long way. Before you fire off that message, put yourself in that person's shoes and realize it's a human being you're talking to. And treat them as such. Treat them the way that you'd like to be treated. And so, getting done a little early tonight, but the selfie culture is something we need to be aware of. We're all Narcissus looking into our phones as he stared into that pool. And it's a very dangerous thing to get fixated on yourself. We're in a one another religion. Love one another, serve one another, look after each other's interests. These are the principles that Christ taught us, not just with his words, but in his life, the way he lived and died for us. Does anybody want to add anything? Nobody said a word through this whole class. Maybe there's something that you'd like to add. Does anybody want to share one of their selfies up on the screen? Sure, we can make that work. Has anybody had a near-death experience from taking a selfie that you'd like to share? Nothing. Well, my voice is about giving out, so I'm going to let you out a little early tonight. I appreciate your attention.